What's up everybody, welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. For those of you interested in following China, macro developments, geopolitical developments, political, economic developments on a weekly basis, and are interested in fact-based analysis, and you want to be as informed about these developments as my clients, maybe consider subscribing. For everyone else, it's good to see you. This is going to be our midweek episode, so it's going to be a little bit shorter. We're basically just going to touch on two main topics. One is the rhetoric, the words and actions with the Taiwan Strait, a very dangerous time at the moment. And we're also going to do a quick update looking at the place of Wechat, the future of Wechat in the United States market, and the updates we've seen over the weekend. If you enjoy the content, please remember to smash that like button, and if you want to support the channel, Patreon is below. But without any further ado, let's jump into this week's China Update. In all my years in China, I don't think I've ever seen as many articles threatening to invade or attack Taiwan in state media in China as I have seen over the last week or so. Combined with increased activity in the South China Sea, with Japan, and on the Sino-Indian border, we are living through an incredibly dangerous time in Asia at the moment, when an accident or miscalculation would spell escalation and conflict. Unfortunately, popular attention in the West is distracted by the pandemic and elections and unrest in the United States. Now, before we look at these developments over the last few days, we need to remind ourselves that we shouldn't be surprised by aggressive state media articles and increased military activity in the region. We know that Taiwan is the ultimate red line for Beijing, and we have been covering the US and Taiwan getting closer over the last month or so. But while Beijing's reaction should be expected, it doesn't make it any less concerning. As we have been discussing over the last month or so, in response to increasingly assertive, even aggressive Chinese state behavior at its territorial periphery, and unrestrained by the desire to maintain a healthy relationship with Beijing, like in the past, the US has been moving closer to Taiwan through its words and actions. As we discussed in the last episode, a delegation led by the US Undersecretary of State of Economic Growth, Energy and Environment met with several Taiwanese officials in Taiwan last week, the highest level official to visit in decades. In response, on Thursday, Beijing sent 18 warplanes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone and another 19 the following day. On Monday, the state-run People's Daily, in a piece clearly designed for both a domestic and an international audience, wrote that the US, quote, has apparently underestimated the sensitivity of the Taiwan issue to China-US relations, and underestimated Chinese resolution and will to defend its sovereign integrity, end quote. On Monday, a spokesperson for Taiwan's Defense Ministry announced that in response to the several dozen planes from the People's Liberation Air Force that crossed what, from the Chinese perspective, is a medium line in the Taiwan Strait last week, they claim changing the status quo, Taiwan was also redefining its rules of engagement with mainland Chinese forces, allowing its military to fire back in self-defense for the first time. Quote, in the face of high-frequency harassment and threats from the enemy's warships and warplanes recently, the military clearly defined the contingency handling regulations concerning the first strike as our right to self-defense and counterattack. End quote. The Taipei-based Liberty Times reported that this essentially means that Taiwanese forces on the front line are able to fire if they determine that the enemy is intended to attack. Officials in Taiwan stress that while the crossing of the median line of the Taiwan Strait by the People's Liberation Air Force consists in escalation on the mainland's side, as well as a change in the status quo in the region, these rules of engagement, these new rules of engagement, did not mean that Taiwan would shoot down planes that cross it in the future, which may increasingly occur. Taiwanese media reports that the People's Liberation Air Force pilots told Taiwanese military personnel during the incursions last week that there was no median line, or they didn't recognize a median line. Again, we're looking here at a status quo change than what we've seen over the last few years. This was backed up by the People's Republic of China Foreign Ministry, who, through a spokesperson on Monday, said, quote, Taiwan is an inseparable part of Chinese territory. The so-called median line of the Taiwan Strait doesn't exist, end quote. People's Liberation Army Eastern Theater Command urged Chinese citizens to, quote, discard any illusions and prepare to fight, end quote. A line repeated by a very famous commentator and former People's Liberation Army professor Song Zhongping in a video viewed millions of times when it was released, in which he claims that the People's Liberation Air Force war games, quote, not only terrify the Tsai administration, here referring to the president's administration in Taiwan, but they also terrify America. State-run Global Times wrote over the weekend, quote, multiple minesweeper flotillas attached to the Chinese People's Liberation Army Southern Theater Command and Eastern Theater Command recently held live fire exercises, honing their capability to effectively and rapidly clear sea lanes from mines and open passages for other warships and landing forces amid Taiwan secessionists' attempt to surround the Taiwan Straits with mines. End quote. And now, if that wasn't clear enough, the same publication, the Global Times, state-run Global Times, also published an editorial entitled, quote, PLA Friday drills not a warning, but rehearsal for Taiwan takeover, end quote, which concluded that, quote, the US and Taiwan must not misjudge the situation or believe the exercise is a bluff. Should they continue to make provocations, a war will inevitably break out. Those who have underestimated Chinese determination recently have paid the price. China decisively put forward the implementation of the national security law for Hong Kong. China has shown that it doesn't fear war on the China-India border. The Taiwan Straits is by no means a place where separatists can act recklessly. If Taiwan authorities try, they will definitely be met with the mainland's military solutions. End quote. On Tuesday, at the United Nations General Assembly meeting, General Secretary Xi Jinping told delegates via video conference that China has, quote, no intention to fight either a Cold War or a hot one with any other country, end quote. Now, this is a midweek episode, so it's a shorter episode. Let's quickly look at the history. Now, this is a shorter episode because it's midweek, but let's quickly look at updates regarding WeChat in the United States. A lot of people are focused on TikTok, but really, in terms of the political relationship and from Beijing's perspective, WeChat is a far more important tool for Beijing than something like TikTok. And this is why we need to keep a closer eye on WeChat. Last Friday, the White House announced that it would be banning US-based downloads of WeChat and TikTok from that Sunday, the Sunday just been, as well as implementing freezes on any servers based in the US that support WeChat and TikTok operations. TikTok initially seemed to have got a deal across the line over the weekend that was blessed by the president. However, this seems to be up in the air at this point. But that's not as important for our purposes here, because the more important of the apps, like I said, is WeChat. WeChat is an incredibly powerful tool for media dominance and narrative control in the overseas Chinese diaspora community for Beijing. So what has happened with WeChat? On Saturday, a federal judge in California granted a preliminary injunction to halt the WeChat ban after the plaintiffs were able to establish a prima facie First Amendment argument. The judge found, quote, WeChat is effectively the only means of communication for many in the community, not only because China bans other apps, but also because Chinese speakers with limited English proficiency have no options other than WeChat, end quote. These are very debatable propositions, as well as a very liberal, in both senses of the word, interpretation of the Constitution. This is just the beginning of a long legal battle that could still take place, and the government still has the right to appeal. But WeChat and its place in the world and in the United States is very important for our purposes here, and it's something that we're going to continue following very closely. So I'll have another update about WeChat, about Taiwan, and about several other major stories, including the economy, which has had some pretty big news out this week, and a couple of domestic stories, as well as an update with China's relationship with India, Japan, and Europe. We're going to be talking about all of that at the end of the week for our main China update. If you guys enjoyed the episode, like I said, don't forget to like. If you want to support and make this 100% subscriber supported, link to Patreon is below. And if you want to share it with people, you're welcome to share it. I welcome anybody who wants to follow this stuff, follow what's happening in China without the punditry, and just look at what's happening on the ground, look at the facts, look at the analysis, and make decisions based on that. With that, I should leave it here. It's the middle of the week, got work in the morning. Leave your questions below, and I'll see you guys at the end of the week. See you then. End quote. State-run Global Times wrote, last Friday, the White House announced that it would ban downloads of TikTok and WeChat from the Sunday, from quote, quote, multiple minesweeper flotillas, quote, multiple, Jesus Christ, Tony.